Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to the launch of our new OECD flagship report, Taming Wildfires in the Context of Climate Change. We've got the full report here and also policy highlights. So you are welcome to look into these. I would especially like to welcome our distinguished guests here with us today, in particular, Minister Ana Abrunhosa, the Minister of Territorial Cohesion of Portugal. Lovely to see you here. Thank you so much for joining us. And joining us virtually is Minister Christos Stylianides, who is the Minister for Climate Crisis and Civil Protection of Greece. So the launch of this report is taking place at a really crucial time. And as I'm sure you have heard over the course of this conference the last few days, more and more countries are being confronted with the devastation of extreme wildfires, with many countries still recovering from or currently experiencing unprecedented damages as a result. And there are, a fair number of examples. I'm from New Zealand. It's a country that's not known particularly for wildfires, perhaps much more so for earthquakes and other natural disasters. But in 2017, the Port Hills, just outside of the city of Christchurch, were devastated by out-of-control fires. I had a slightly personal connection there in that my father and stepmother were living at the time on the Port Hills, and I recall that they were given 20 minutes by the police to pack up and get out of their house because the fires were in danger of moving from the forest cover into the urban area. And in fact, a fair number of houses were lost. So I can understand and know the speed with which fires can move, the intensity with which they can burn, and how scary it is, frankly, to be in the midst of something that is so totally beyond your control. Right now, we know that the province of Alberta in Canada is facing an outbreak of over 100 simultaneous fires at really an unusually early time of the year. These fires have already led to the evacuation of tens of thousands of people, and firefighters are still struggling to control some of those fires. And monitoring and controlling that slow burn hotspot type parts of the fires, even when the main fire has been put out, is a mammoth job. The 2019 bushfires in Australia burned a staggering 24 million hectares of land, an area half the size of France. There was unprecedented species loss and truly moving pictures of burned and really injured koala, kangaroos, etc. 3 billion animals lost. And again, I had a slight personal connection there. I was in New Zealand, which is 3 hours flight away from where the fires were taking place in Australia. But the haze reached right across the Tasman Sea. The snow in the Alps in New Zealand was a kind of yellowy colour, thanks to the smoke that had come from those fires in Australia. Back in 2018, the Camp Fire in California caused damages of nearly $20 billion. And this number doesn't even take into account the indirect, longer-term impacts of the fires. And these statistics are truly unprecedented. Although we know that some forest ecosystems need fire to keep their ecological functions intact, the extreme nature of our wildfires today is really pushing those ecosystems and others beyond their natural boundaries. And of course, it's not only land cover and forests and buildings that are affected, human lives as well. The 2018 Attica fires in Greece caused 126 fatalities. while the 2015 wildfires in Indonesia resulted in an estimated 100,000 deaths due to air pollution. Now again, a personal aspect of this, I was posted in Singapore in 2019. The bushfires, from deforestation in particular, in Indonesia were not quite as bad as 2015. But even in 2019, living in Singapore, there were several weeks where it was virtually impossible to go outside, and the air was, really horrible to breathe. So what it must have been like for those people living in Indonesia, so close to where the fires were burning out of control, it's hard to imagine. So even for countries that have not previously been subjected to wildfires, like Germany, Sweden, or the United Kingdom, climate change now means they are increasingly becoming a very real threat. And with this in mind, we have to be ready for a future that will likely see many more extreme wildfire events. And climate change plays a major role in determining the frequency and intensity of wildfires. In particular, rising temperatures and changing precipitation and wind patterns influence the scale and complexity of the fires we're dealing with. Prolonged and frequent heat waves and droughts will also undoubtedly intensify wildfire risk in the future. So the systemic integration of planning for wildfire prevention and for recovery across all areas of environmental and climate policy making is now more critical than ever. Our decisions matter. Recent wildfires have shown how the decisions we make about land use, about infrastructure planning, or tourism, and that's a far from exhaustive list, they largely determine the impacts and outcomes of these extreme events. For example, increased urban sprawl has created an extensive wildland-urban interface, and when these two distinct environments intersect, overlap, or butt up against each other, it only worsens the damages when wildfires do occur. Addressing these challenges requires a rethinking of our policies and practices to prevent, manage, and recover from wildfires. In the face of extreme wildfires, fire suppression is becoming less and less effective, and I'm sure you've been hearing that message throughout the week. So it's less effective in fully containing the losses and damages. We need to think and act differently in response to the new and evolving wildfire patterns we're now seeing, and that means adapting earlier on and focusing on preventative action. Our work at the OECD supports policymakers in doing just that. And the report we're launching today brings together the latest insights from wildfire research. It highlights recommended policies and practices for actions countries can take to limit wildfire loss and damage early on, and to do so by acting before wildfires start and get out of control. My colleague, Walid Wislati, will give more details about the report's key findings very shortly. And in closing, and before introducing our panelists, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Portugal, and especially its Agency for the Integrated Management of Rural Fires, and Mr. Tiago Oliveira for having supported our work, for the close collaboration between us over the past 2 years, and for hosting us today. Now, thank you very much. And with those words, I am now delighted to welcome Ana Brunosa, Minister of Territorial Cohesion of Portugal, to share Portugal's experience in responding to the devastating wildfires your country has had to experience in recent years. We look forward to hearing your particular perspective on just how to make sure that all of Portugal's affected territory is well positioned and equipped to address these extreme wildfires with a view to leaving no one behind. So, Minister Abrunosa, over to you, please.
Thank you. Good morning. I would like to compliment the OECD Environment Director, dear Joe, thank you, and dear speakers, ladies and gentlemen. I thank you for the invitation to address the 8th International Wildland Fire Conference. I would like to compliment especially Tiago Oliveira and his team, AGIF, that made the difference in what concerns to deal with the wildfires. There is a Portugal before AGIF and a Portugal after AGIF, and as a government and as a citizen, I would like to publicly recognize that. Thank you, Tiago, and your team. I would also like to thank the organization for selecting Portugal and Oporto, this beautiful city, to host this meeting. And thank you for the opportunity to participate in the launch event of OECD of this study that means so much for Portugal. In recent years, wildland fires have had a devastating impact on our territories. This is a matter currently affecting us on a global scale already to a significant degree, and more fundamentally, crucial to the future of planet Earth and humanity. Let me remind you that climate change is an indisputable reality, to which no one can be oblivious, as it is already evident. It is the culmination of undeterred development without looking at the means and their resultant costs. The region's vulnerabilities to coastal erosion, floods, droughts, and rural and forest fires continue to be recurring challenges in Portugal, further fueled by climate change. Without any doubt, it is essential to implement policies in line with the prevention and fight against the fires that have consumed and destroyed our lands and territories, which for years went beyond the traditional seasonality of occurrence in the summer and became a constant threat. The urgency for such policies was revealed by recent scientific studies which indicate that Portugal's future climatic scenario will be one in which 7 out of every 10 years will be affected significantly by drought, and an increase of 4 Celsius degrees of average temperature over the next decade. On one hand, we need to increase resilience and reduce the vulnerability of the territory to climate change. But on the other hand, we must further our knowledge and disseminate information on varying climate factors and their specific impacts on the landscape, territory, people, economy, and various sectors of activity. Considering the importance of tackling climate change, the European Union has set for 2030 that 30% of cohesion policy funds would have to be used to support climate objectives in research, in companies, in biodiversity. These climate objectives are in line with the commitment of the Paris Agreement reached in 2015 on climate change. This agreement highlights the evidence from studies indicating to the fact that countries in the south and the Iberian Peninsula have the greatest vulnerabilities and opportunities with the climate change. Likewise, Next Generation EU funding, as the Commissioner earlier said, is helping to achieve the ambitious goal of becoming the first climate-neutral continent by 2050. In addition to European premise, the fight against climate change is an issue that has been gaining prominence at a national level as a result of the development and implementation of initiatives in various sectoral areas and territorial scales. Portugal was, in 2010, one of the pioneers at European level in the adoption of a national strategy for adaptation to climate change with 3 main objectives: improve the level of knowledge about climate change, implement adaptation measures, and promote the integration of adaptation into sectoral policies. However, the severity of the 2017 fires drew attention to the need to look at the forests in an integrated and transversal way. At the time, I was the president of the Coordination and Development Commission of Portugal Central Region, and I was able to witness firsthand the brutality of a natural catastrophe situation, consequent of the complexity of exponential climate change, which resulted in a loss of human life unprecedented in Portugal. It was a moment that required a reflection on a new method of approach. In this sense, and at the level of wildland fires, the Portuguese government has carried out important reforms and adopted new measures targeting the prevention and combating of rural fires. To this end, the new integrated rural fire management system was implemented in 2020 with the aim of ensuring a closer rapprochement between prevention and combat. This is put into practice by strengthening and progressive reorientation of resources to the pillar of prevention and surveillance. The governance for the integrated rural fire management system is founded on the premises of National Action Plan. This is a dynamic action plan and is based on the premises of feedback loop system. The descending fragmentation, top-down, of a national strategy plan is converted to a localized tactical intervention which, within a common framework, orientates the execution of inferior levels plans. This conversion, in turn, aids also an ascending, aggregated, bottom-up, which attributes to larger scale plans the consistency, harmony, and detail in accordance with the reality that is understood and experienced locally, thus involving different entities of the territory. On regional level, with the Portuguese Coordination and Development Commissions, on a sub-regional with the municipalities associations, and locally with the municipalities. So we need a multi-scale governance, as we spoke earlier. And this is very, very important. And this was the job of AGIF, to put the reflection, the planning, and the fighting in a multi-scale, multi-level dimension, and in order to do so, it is mandatory to have a multi-sectoral also coordination. Many times we speak about means, but we should speak more about coordination, about organization. Because this is not a question of means, this is a question of intelligence, of organization, and the previous panel was very, very important in these dimensions. Empowering the territory and its entities means a specialized solution that can be implemented in order to reduce the risk of wildfire. On the other hand, a landscape transformation program was also created for territories with vulnerabilities arising from the conflict between the land occupation and its use, with the aim of promoting a transformation of the landscape that guarantees resilience, sustainability, and valorization of the territory. The Landscape Transformation Program includes initiatives such as reordering and management of landscape, integrated landscape management areas, the village condominium, and a program related to reparceling and land redistribution. Another important measure was the reorganization of the register system for the rustic property and the implementation of new soil occupation monitoring system. These are tools that use state-of-the-art technologies essential to forests and agriculture, strategic plan, and civil protection. It's in our country, and I think in your country, we still need to know who owns the land. This is a big issue because in many parts of our country we don't know who owns the land. We have another big problem because we don't have a market, and the owners, they don't have the incentives to clean and to manage their lands. So we should implement market using the carbon market, use an effective payment ecosystem services, and we need to do so quickly. Reducing the risk of rural fire and increasing the security of the population are critical success factors for the fixation of people in rural areas and the promotion of private investment in these territories. This is also a way of promoting territorial cohesion. In summary, in recent years, Portugal has revised the law to institute a new governance model, strengthening dialogue and cross-agency cooperation, designed and implemented a national plan, a national strategy with clear goals and responsibilities, started continuous monitoring of the implementation of the National Action Programme 2020-30, initiated a landscape transformation program to make the territory less vulnerable to severe wildfires, reinforced human and technical resources. In review, with regards to wildfire, the main idea must be prevention. This is our priority. We must be able to take advantage of all the instruments and forms of support that make our territories more resilient and prepared. The fight against climate change is an endeavor for all of us, government, municipalities, and citizens. This is an effort where everyone counts. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Minister Brunoza. That was a really insightful speech and very, very interesting to hear what literally a wake-up call the 2017 fires here in Portugal have been, and the significant rethinking and changes that have happened since. So thank you for sharing those insights today. Now I have the honor to introduce Christos Stylianides, the Minister for Climate Crisis and Civil Protection of Greece. Unfortunately, due to urgent government engagements, the Minister can't be with us in person today, but he did kindly send us a video message that I'm now going to invite all of you to watch. Let me also warmly welcome the Minister's team, which I understand has also joined us for this session. So now over to the technology to bring us the video.
Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, let me start with thanking the OECD for this kind invitation. It's my pleasure to participate at today's event, which takes place at the occasion of the 8th International Wildland Fire Conference in Porto, in Portugal. Unfortunately, prior obligations in my schedule did not allow me to be there with you. And I thank you once again for making it possible for me to be with you virtually through this video message. This event is an excellent opportunity to discuss and exchange ideas and best practices so as to reinforce our collective wildfire preparedness and response, an issue which, as you know, is of great importance. The Hellenic Ministry for Climate Crisis and Civil Protection has been actively involved in this OECD project, and Greece has been one of the case study countries in the OECD Flagship report. The work done by the OECD was particularly helpful and valuable for us, and the collaboration has been excellent. Dear friends, the hard reality is that climate change, climate crisis is one of the most pressing challenges for our planet, maybe the most pressing. It is multidimensional, and particularly complex issue, which is causing more frequent and severe natural disasters. Wildfires, severe floods, droughts, and extreme weather phenomena are the new normal, unfortunately, the new hard reality. We feel the consequences every day in Europe, but also around the globe. And unfortunately, according to science, these consequences are here to stay. Last summer showed once again the hard way that no country alone can respond effectively to wildfires or any other severe natural disaster. During last year's fire season in 2022, we witnessed wildfires, mega fires, affecting not only the wider Mediterranean basin, an area particularly prone to wildfires, but countries in Central Europe too. Apart from Spain, Portugal, France, and Greece, we had the examples of Germany and the Czech Republic. It once again became clear that the climate crisis is here. The facts speak for themselves. For us, the Greek government, tackling climate crisis is very high on our agenda. The Hellenic Ministry for Climate Crisis and Civil Protection was established in September 2021, and its establishment came after the devastating wildfires, mega fires of summer 2021 in our country. The core feature of the newly established ministry is the link between climate crisis and civil protection, a link which I strongly believe is of utmost importance because the climate crisis is already ahead of us. The objective of our ministry is to meet the new needs in disaster risk management as these arise due to climate crisis. Our main goal is to bridge the traditional approach to disaster risk management, which focuses until now on response, with three key pillars, the very well-known triangle: prevention, preparedness, and resilience. This is our new dogma, which guides all our actions and initiatives, a dogma which we implemented last year and which we'll implement this year too. We want to build our prevention capacity, but at the same time to secure that our response capacities remain robust and effective. We follow a holistic approach aiming to enhance our adaptation efforts and strengthen our country's climate resilience. An approach which put emphasis on collaboration and synergies on a global, European, national, regional, and local level. Dear friends, there is no doubt that the only way to address the consequences of the climate crisis is to work together. We must work collectively to take initiatives and implement collaborations with emphasis on prevention and adaptation. Of course, this cannot be done overnight. This may sound trivial or a cliché, but the global, the European, and our experience from last year in Greece made clear that increasing preventing measures and structures in relation to response is a gradual process. It's not automatic and it cannot be done, as I already said, overnight. Collaboration and the exchange of best practices between countries is also key. In Europe, the EU Civil Protection Mechanism and RESC-EU are the most important and successful instrument of cooperation in the field of disaster management. RESC-EU, in particular, has clearly shown how the European Union can act as a multiplier of national capacities in emergency response. It has shown how we are stronger together. Greece's assistance with firefighting aerial means to Portugal, France, and other European countries is a tangible example of this solidarity. Another example of solidarity on the ground last summer was the prepositioning project which we implemented for the first time last year in Greece. European firefighters from France, Romania, Germany, Bulgaria, Finland, and Norway were pre-based in Greece throughout the summer season and assisted substantially the local firefighting forces, collaborating and bringing added value in terms of capacity and exchange of expertise. This is exactly the path we need to follow. This should be our compass for enhancing climate resilience and adaptation in the European Union and beyond, always in a structured and flexible framework. Ladies and gentlemen, I once again want to thank the OECD for this excellent project, which brought together experts and policymakers from countries all around the world. A project which promoted collaboration and the exchange of best practices. A clear example of the type of actions we need. Greece will continue to support such initiatives because the challenge is huge and the dilemmas are hard. The cost of inaction is today higher than ever, and in politics we have to make difficult choices based on our principles, but also grounded on realism and rationalism. I wish every success to your event and a fruitful discussion. Thank you once again for your attention.
Well, I think we're beginning to hear some very consistent and strong messages about the urgency of the need to take action, to collaborate, and to have an integrated and holistic response. Let me thank Minister Stylianides and his team online, and my thanks again to Minister Abrunozza for your presence with us today. I really want to reiterate our real appreciation for the support of both your countries for the OECD's work in the past 2 years, because it's only with the active engagement of countries like yours that we've been able to bring this report together for today's launch. So thank you again, and we would be delighted if you are able to stay with us for the second part of this launch session. So in this second part, we are going to walk you through the OECD report. I just want to note that our work started with what was the first ever international conference the OECD convened on wildfires. It took place in January 2020, right in the middle and against the backdrop of the devastating bushfires in Australia. Since then, the OECD has worked closely with international experts and country ministries and agencies to gather the evidence we're going to present to you today. Now you can hear my voice is giving out slightly, so I'm pleased to be handing over the floor to my colleague, Walid Wezlati, who is the acting head of the Climate, Biodiversity and Water Division of the OECD Environment Directorate, and he's going to present the report's key findings. Walid.
Thank you, Joe. Dear Minister, thank you very much, and ladies and gentlemen. So I'm delighted today to present for you key results from our report just launched now on taming wildfires in the context of climate change. But let me first say a few words, like many of you here in the room and who will watch also this record. Actually, we appreciate a lot the role of both ministers and their commitment in terms of addressing this huge problem and also the complexity of your duties and responsibility. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here with you today to present the findings of this report. It's the result of a cross-country comparative analysis and presents emerging wildfire policies and practices to manage wildfire extremes and provides a set of policy recommendations to support your effort, country's effort in wildfire risk reduction. Extreme wildfires are causing unprecedented impacts on communities, economies, but also on the environment, biodiversity and species, etc. As wildfire risk is set to keep growing under climate change, preventive action is key to contain future loss and damages. The OECD supports countries through policy recommendations and peer learning in strengthening resilience to wildfire in the context of climate change. So this report provides a global assessment of changing wildfire trends in the context of climate change and their observed and projected environmental, social, and economic impacts. It presents the finding of cross-country comparative analysis as well as the result of 5 country case studies conducted in Australia, Costa Rica, Greece, Portugal, and the United States. The study sought to document, evaluate, and compare countries' effort. The finding of this report demonstrate the growing limits of fire suppression in containing wildfire damage and underline the urgency for scaling up measures that help reduce wildfire at the source. Let me first highlight what science tells us here, and we know that there's a growing threat of extreme wildfire in the world. Wildfires are uncontrolled fires that occur in wildland areas and are nature component in many ecosystems that provides important ecological functions. While wildfires are natural part of the ecosystem process, extreme wildfires can cause abrupt and potentially irreversible disruptions. Extreme wildfire are defined as wildfire events that are particularly severe in terms of their size, duration, intensity, and impacts. Researchers suggested that wildfire frequency, size, and severity, as well as the duration of the fire season, are on rise in many regions of the world, which result of the threat of extreme wildfire is growing. Examples here, such as in Australia, average wildfire frequency almost doubled between 1980 and 2020. In the United States, wildfire severity increased eightfold between the same period. Risks are also growing at the global level. For example, the duration of wildfire season grew by 27% globally since 1979, as the figures show. There are several drivers behind the increasing frequency and severity of wildfires. First, there's a number of important socio-economic drivers that contribute to extreme wildfire occurrence and impacts, including extreme wildfire losses and damages. It's important to draw the analysis on the drivers of the wildfires because the policies, as presented by the ministers, will first look at the drivers because it's important to identify them in each context. Such drivers are, for example, unsustainable land use practices and environmental degradation, which can make ecosystems less resilient to wildfires. For instance, deforestation and forest loss can worsen drought condition, while peatland drainage increase the landscape flammability. Another driver is rural land abandonment, which facilitate fuel accumulation. Human drivers are not only contributing to extreme wildfire occurrence, but also to their impact. The rapidly growing wildfire-urban interface exposes people and assets to wildfire risk as the number of people assets in their area increased in the past decades. For example, between 1990 and 2010, this exposure area in the United States increased by 33%. So that's very important to understand that the fact that our urban development, more our urban extension and city expansion is going to areas where the wildfire is already under risk, this will expose more people to such risk. So human activity is the most common source of wildfire ignition and currently accounted for about 70% of the total land surface affected by fire globally. Human ignition and of wildfire can occur both accidentally but sometimes deliberately through reasons. There's growing also scientific knowledge about the complex links between climate change and extreme wildfires hazard, which suggests that climate change affects wildfire occurrence, intensity, and also behavior. As a result, wildfires are affecting new areas and increases the uncertainty of fire patterns. So there's a lot of things to learn from the last years in terms of combating wildfires, because the behavior of such extreme phenomenon, it's not the same in the past. And some people here in the room knows what happened in the past in terms of the trajectory of wildfires and how combating it. It's really complex in the current context. So wildfire risk increased by high atmospheric temperature, changing precipitation, wind, and lighting patterns. heat waves, and droughts. So those are actually the climate and induced factors or drivers for the new characteristics of the wildfire. The impact of climate change on wildfires has been observed in several regions. For example, climate change is estimated to have doubled the total forest area burned in the western United States. In the case of Australia, the 2019-2020 wildfires were estimated to be at least 30% more likely due to climate change, while the extent of the 2017 extreme wildfire in Canada was 7 to 11 times higher. So the frequency, the severity of extreme wildfire are set to increase in the future due to climate change. In many regions, this means high frequency, intensity, size, duration, spread, rate, and of wildfires. And just here, I'll stop a little bit to talk out the notes. Today, the Meteorological World Association, United Nations Association, announced that the risk to pick the 1.5 degree will happen now, actually, between 23 and 27. It's the warmest period expected with high likelihood. So those factors will actually exacerbate just what I was saying about wildfires. We don't want to be catastrophic, but we want to say things in a more clear way and to alert about this phenomenon and its potential impacts. And I'm sure experts in a while will come back to that in more details. Extreme wildfire impacts. So the extreme wildfire affects climate change, but also emitting and burning carbon sinks. Under normal condition, wildfires have a limited net influence on global carbon emission, as wildfire emissions are mostly reabsorbed by regrowing vegetation in the aftermath of the fire. However, due to the extreme wildfire, a net transfer of CO2 from vegetation and the soil to the atmosphere has been observed. By burning vegetation and soil, extreme wildfire in forest and peatlands reduce land carbon storage capacity, further exacerbating the risk. For instance, during the 1920 wildfires in Australia, CO2 emissions were 8 times higher than in the average wildfire season. So this is the feedback effect, so the other way to go. The growing occurrence of extreme wildfire can cause significant impacts on ecosystem and the climate system, human lives and well-being, as well as the economy as a whole. In terms of environmental impacts, long-term biodiversity losses, impact on soil, water and air quality, and the greenhouse gas emissions and loss of carbon sinks are among the main important impacts here. For instance, the 1920 wildfires in Australia affected 3 billion animals. When it comes to the impact on people and society, wildfire can cause long-term health problems, respiratory, cardiovascular disease, and also psychological impacts. Cause direct fatalities and result in displacement of social disruption. For instance, wildfire smoke is responsible for 340,000 premature deaths annually. In case of economic losses, the economic wildfire result in asset loss and damage, causes economic disruption and impose high management and recovery costs. Again, through the wildfire in Australia 1920, causes estimated at 23 billion American dollars in economic damage which is a huge amount. These impacts are projected to increase with climate change and the frequency and the severity of wildfires, but also the duration of the fire seasons are raised globally. The need for better wildfire management. As a result, countries need to adapt their wildfire management system in order to limit future wildfire-induced losses and damages. While extreme events led countries to scale up their emergency preparedness and responses capacity, they also showed the limit of suppression in containing wildfire damage. In order to limit losses and damages, a paradigm shift in wildfire management is needed, bringing focus to prevention and adaptation. This consists of scaling up risk prevention measures, including adaptation action to reduce hazard, exposure and vulnerability, and mitigation actions to address climate drivers. Now, I'll finish with some key recommendations. Just before going there, we put here, if you would like to serve yourself, so policy highlights, which is a summary of the report with all the recommendations you can have. So please come and feel free to take an example. To manage wildfire extremes and help countries to strengthen resilience to wildfire in the context of climate change, the OECD report provides a set of recommendations. In the following, I will present key policy action that can support countries. So, first, protect and restore wildfires ecosystems. Country needs to strengthen ecosystem protection and adaptive management for wildfire prevention. This goes through protecting ecosystems, but also restoring a degraded ecosystem, and better monitoring and enforcement are needed. Second, countries need to scale up fuel management efforts to reduce fuel accumulation in the wildland-urban interface. This means limiting the amount of vegetation available to burn, but certain measures such as prescripted and cultural fires, other measures such as buffer zones and the fuel bricks can help to reduce the vulnerability of assets in high-risk areas and limit wildfire spread. We know this recommendation seems to be strong because the urban extension is making a lot of pressure, mainly when it comes to natural amenities, to belt close to forests or coastal areas. All countries have this kind of difficulties. But at the same time, and regarding all the challenges that just presented now, there's a kind of strong policy recommendation to prevent people to not be exposed to this risk. And the trade-off is there. So you can give access to better amenities for people, but at the same time you expose them to more important wildfire risk. Adapt land use and building regulation. Strengthening land use planning and building regulation of wildfire prevention is essential to protect lives, livelihoods and assets. For example, land use planning can limit urban sprawl in the wildfire-urban interface and reduce exposure to wildfires. And here we observe it in many European cities. The urban sprawl is continuing. It's something that it's the increasing trend. but it takes a new form, which new urban settlement are really disconnected and scattered across the territory, making people more exposed to those risks. So this form of urban sprawl have to be tracked, and we made a work in the OECD through satellite image since 1990 to 2020 to see how this urban forms evolves. And it's really interesting to see how this new urban patch is happening in wildfire high-risk zones. So something to be alerted in terms of urban sprawl. And also adapt infrastructure, design, operation, management that should be strengthened for resilience of whole communities. And also improve wildfire risk assessment, harnessing knowledge for better wildfire management and improve wildfire risk assessment are key elements here. For instance, information on wildfire hazard and exposure and vulnerability is a key to create wildfire risk maps and to update them regularly. Such tool can help to better understand, model, and map wildfire hazard drivers and behaviors. Integrating climate change impact models into wildfire activity projection helps to effectively assess the future wildfire risk, because we are in a changing situation with the climate change. You cannot map it once 10 years, or you have to do it regularly and according to the integrated climate change scenarios. That would be very helpful. In addition, participatory approach can enhance the acceptance and the use of expert-informed risk assessment. That's also important to share all this knowledge with the population and get sense of awareness of it, because it's not just to make restriction on people, but mainly to get people involved on such a project. Develop a whole of government approach. That's also important. I'm looking to my colleagues here. It's essential to strengthen the policy and institutional framework and develop a whole government approach. This goes through coordination, collaboration, and knowledge exchange across sectors and levels of governments are critical. So for instance, the creation of central coordination bodies, that's what we propose here, like a kind of agency can coordinate this aspect. National wildfire management strategy are key to define clear roles and provide overarching policy framework guiding the work of the whole relevant agencies. Last but not least, mainstreaming wildfire prevention into sectoral policy. Example, in agriculture, forestry, infrastructure is essential to build synergy and ensure policy alignment. Example here, which is done in Portugal, but also in Greece and the United States. However, to date, the effective integration wildfire prevention into sectoral policy remains the exception rather than the norm. Secure appropriate funding. So country needs to scale up funding, that's clear. And closing the gap between wildfires prevention and suppression funding is critical to strengthen long-term resilience. And we have here in the summary all the recommendation. I would like to summarize here. Our cross-country comparative analysis showed that in response to the growing occurrence of extreme wildfires, affected countries have scaled up their emergency and response capacity. However, increasing extreme wildfires have shown the limit of suppression in containing the damage. The findings of this report demonstrate the need for moving away from a focus on fire suppression and underline the urgency of scaling up measures that help reduce wildfire at the source. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Walid, for that. I am conscious that our esteemed panelists have been sitting here on stage for quite a long time, and I know we started a little bit late, but I do want to make sure we have a good amount of time for a panel discussion. So I'm going to invite Catherine Gamper, team leader of the Climate Change Adaptation, Mitigation and Resilience team, to take us through this panel discussion to conclude the session.
Thank you very much, Joe, and thank you very much for your patience, dear panelists. I think we're going to get right to it, and thanks everybody in the room. We're very conscious that we're keeping you between us and lunch, so let me start right into it. As Walid and our distinguished speakers before mentioned already, much of what we heard has been characterized as what we might call a new normal in what wildfires are occurring. Stefan, what do you think from a science perspective? What is science telling us? Is what we're seeing a new normal, or do we need to expect something else going forward under changing climatic conditions?
Yeah, I think that the term normal is used very often, that we are approaching a new normal in many ways, especially in terms of climate change. I think the better way to look at it is actually we are moving very rapidly with accelerating speed from what was considered the norm in wildland fire around the world. Now, of course, wildland fire in the past wasn't normal either. We've brought in new species into different countries to increase the flammability of the landscape. We've mentioned all this before: rural depopulation, excessive fire suppression in the United States, for example. All this has changed fire across the globe. But we're now in a new era where, on top of this, we are having climate change that changes fire weather essentially everywhere around the world, and in most cases making fire weather more extreme. So we're superimposing this new system for the first time on this planet, that we're having an increased fire risk in many places for a longer duration that leads to not only more extensive fires, but only fires that are much more severe. Now, this is not happening everywhere. Most of the fires will be perfectly normal, like the fire we've seen before, so we shouldn't dismiss this. It's only the extreme fires that we need to worry about in that respect, but those extremes are accelerating, and that's really worrying.
Thank you so much. Over to you now, Julienne, from Canada. If we look into what climate scientists call attribution science, there's more and more such studies coming to the fore, especially after extreme fires. We've seen them in the last few years. And they are at each spot of extreme fires telling us just what the attributing effect of climate change may have been or is estimated to be. And Canada's 2017 fires, as Walid said, were estimated to be 7 to 10 times or 11 times more likely than they would have been without climate change. Is that what you would see the new normal being in Canada? And how good are you in integrating what we know from climate science in understanding wildfire hazard and in mapping this out across the country?
Well, I would say, like Stefan, the term normal can be problematic in this context because climate change is bringing to us more volatility, more extremes, and more uncertainty. And so what we're trying to do is adapt our wildfire management systems and our whole disaster resilience context to this uncertainty and to these extremes, which is really quite a complex problem to solve. So, there's no question that in Canada, some parts of Canada are becoming warmer and drier. Our fire seasons are already at least 2 weeks longer, or starting 2 weeks earlier than they were just 50 years ago. And as was highlighted during the presentation, there's, all those increased lightning, increased moisture, increased dryness. So in Canada, we get quite a mixed result depending on which part of the country we're in, because it's quite a large country. And if we use Alberta as an example, where we're experiencing an extremely early and extremely extreme fire season, it really calls into question our approach. and our focus on suppression in particular, because we're seeing how difficult it is to suppress extreme wildfires during an extremely dry spring, a carryover drought, and we're losing the battle, and calling and grateful for our international collaborators in that context. So I would say that if we think about the causes of those fires being early spring, highly unlikely to have been lightning. And so that really calls into question, you know, the degree of those fires that were human caused, and really the emphasis that needs to be put on prevention in that context. So, you know, normal also implies average, and we're now at 1.6 million hectares burned just in the last few weeks, compared to an average of 80,000 hectares. Evacuations on par with, although dispersed, not different from the Fort McMurray experience that we had in 2016. So, and most of the country under a smoke advisory. So we're really feeling that pain quite intensely in Canada right now. In terms of our risk assessments and whether those consider climate change, I would say they most certainly do, especially in the mapping context that was shown on the screen. I would say that the transfer of this knowledge into long-term decision-making around risk is a work in progress. On May 11th, Canada released its first ever national risk profile on 3 natural hazards: floods, earthquakes, and wildfire. And there are more national risk profiles coming with respect to natural disasters. And it highlights all the same things that this report, so I don't need to repeat them, because it highlights all the exact same things and aligns very well with the global picture. And it calls for that enhanced collaboration across all sectors that is recommended here. And Canada is mobilizing accordingly. You know, we're developing a national prevention and mitigation strategy. But wildfire is moving faster. And I think that's one of the pieces, is that we need to accelerate our risk understanding and our adaptation to risk.
Excellent. I guess moving into implementing all this is another task. And here we have a country sitting next to us, or someone representing one of its agencies that has perhaps been less acutely affected of some of these extreme fires we've been talking about. It's Austria. And we would like to know from you whether you're expecting this to change going forward, or do you think that Austria can sort of lean back and sort of say, let others deal with these problems?
Thank you very much, Catherine. I think you're perfectly right. Austria seems to be a country with almost no problems with forest fires, but definitely things are changing. But I think I want to point out that we should not overestimate the effect of climate change as such, but also consider the effects of land use and the human impact, and also consider the cascading effects of different kinds of natural disasters. I'll give you 2 examples from Austria. The first example is that Austria is maybe so successful in not having forest fires because it's the forests in Austria, which is 50% of the land cover, is perfectly maintained. Landowners are interested to maintain their forests, and there's a lot, not very much what you call fuel in the forests at the moment. But on the other hand, we are facing increasing wildfires, especially in areas where it's not well maintained, like a wildfire last year in our military training center, where 1 square kilometer of forest was burned as such. It's 10 times the size of an average Austrian wildfire. And the other thing is, what is going on in the south of our country is a huge catastrophe concerning the bark beetle. 25 square kilometers of forest were destructed last year, and it's going on and it's getting even worse. And what happens now is, on the one hand, people are not able to maintain the forests anymore. They don't get wood out of the forests, so we decrease in this maintenance. It's not attractive anymore from the economic side point of view. And on the other hand, if these forests are destroyed and we have enough fuel and drought, then we will maybe have wildfires in these areas, and then we lose our soils. And these are the most important protective forests in our country. directly protecting settlements, directly protecting critical infrastructure. And that means these cascading effects, not the wildfire as such, but accumulating other forest diseases and catastrophes can lead to a new real reality in Austria, maybe a game changer.
Very, very interesting. Thank you very much. In our work, and you've heard this several times this morning already by our director, Joe Tyndall, as well as Walid in his presentation before, we showed that in the majority of countries that have been subject to these extreme fires in the past years, the first reaction that governments show and that we can trace on paper is scaling up their budgets and their capacity in terms of fire management and emergency management and fire suppression. And just one quote that Walid had mentioned is in the United States, this budget has gone up fourfold in the last 30 to 40 years. And there's a good justification of it, because we want to contain losses and damage from happening. However, we've also seen, not just today, but also in the previous sessions, just how important prevention measures are in order to not have these budgets explode out of proportion, but also in our ability to manage forest fires effectively. If we look at Alberta, currently these fires that we're hearing about, they're so strong that they're even perhaps surpassing the prevention measures that were put in place, because there's heavy winds, and those heavy winds, they make sparks travel over the fuel breaks that we invested in. Can you reflect at this early stage already what lessons could be learned for reinforcing prevention measures in such a challenging context?
Sure. I mean, the number of severe fire seasons that we've experienced in Canada in just the last 10 years has taught us a lot of lessons. And one of them is that we can't just rely on fuel reduction treatments to reduce the risk of wildfire and increase community resilience to those things. And so the lessons we are learning and have learned are a lot of the same ones that are highlighted in the report. The importance of collaboration, the importance of common messaging across jurisdictions. So if we use Alberta as an example, there was a province-wide fire ban in many parts of the province, but not in the municipal areas and not in the counties. And so a lot of the early ignitions that we saw this fire season were from those areas and in those rural areas that didn't have the same measures. And so the shared messaging and communication around risk is a really important thing to build on and to keep those lessons in sight. And as a result, you know, Canada is, like other countries, has invested in suppression recently, $269 million to help provinces and territories with their equipment and fire suppression needs and training needs. But more recently still has really invested in the prevention and mitigation side of the story, with a huge investment in expanding prevention mitigation measures through Fire Smart type program and community building capacity in communities. And focusing on the knowledge foundation that's required to implement adaptation measures, particularly in forest management. And then also through a investment in an international center of excellence for wildfire resilience and innovation, where, although it's not established yet, where we hope that it will serve as a forum to share successes and accelerate learning so that we can better keep up with the pace of wildfire. I think I'll leave it at that for now.
Great. We're looking forward to hearing more from that center coming out. If we go back to Austria, you seem to have engaged early on, and already since a few years, if not decades, in changing the way you do forestry management, in changing the types of trees that you're planting, supposedly because you are looking into a future that sees different changes in temperatures, different precipitation patterns. Could you share with the audience here what were the enabling factors of making Austria be so visionary and proactive in this space?
I'm not quite sure if we were visionary. I think it's I have heard three things on this conference. One is the importance of prevention. And I think Austria has a big tradition in prevention concerning other risks like flooding, avalanches, no avalanches, or mass movements. And this puts us in a specific situation in an alpine environment. Second thing is, looking at climate change means in the Alps a doubling of temperature. So if you have an increase of 2 degrees globally, you have 4 degrees in the Alps. So we are seeing the change more directly than others. So maybe these are drivers, and it enables us to convince our government that we take action plans, like action plan on forest fires, which was issued last year. But concerning maintaining the forest, we are always very proud of this intensive maintenance of the forest, and the landowners, they stick to their forest, so they know exactly where they have their real estate, they know which trees are there, but they don't know how to handle it if now the next generation of forests or trees has to be completely different. We have spruces now, and we know exactly the spruce is not able to stand climate change, so what to do? We try to develop strategies and find out about the requirements of the forest stands to withstand climate change, to withstand these forest risks. But we know exactly that some of the trees that grow within the next 100 years, if temperature is increasing, are not growing in Austria at the moment. They are growing maybe in Croatia or somewhere else in the world, maybe on the Caucasus area. So this is a complete step into an unknown future, and so Austria has not a solution, but maybe we have a tradition how to handle these problems, and we are more aware than maybe other countries, I don't know.
Excellent, very interesting. That brings us back to Stefan. You've worked with us, thankfully, in the last 2.5 years to get the science right behind the work that we're doing, and we're very, very grateful for that. And we hope that in that process you were also exposed to a fair amount of folks like us that talk about policy, that think about policy. What did you take away from these discussions? What do you think countries should still do to get a better handle of especially wildfire risk prevention? And in return, what do you take away for your own work in science? Where do you think you need to do better in order to help us do our work in the policy space?
Yeah, I mean, to the first question, I think we are really moving in the right direction in terms of policy, that many countries are putting more effort, more resources, more communication into prevention, but also into post-fire activities when the fire has occurred. So Portugal is a great example, but there is still a lot to do. So many countries are still focusing primarily on investing in suppression, which is not surprising, and we will have to continue investing in suppression if we look at how the fire weather is changing across the globe. It will get worse without a doubt, especially in those areas that are densely forested and densely populated at the same time, such as Portugal, parts of Spain, the United States, and so on. So I think it's definitely a step in the right direction. Policy is changing, attention is changing to fire. Now, to your second question, in terms of what I've sort of taken away and what I think where science can contribute. Of course, science contributes, like I said earlier, to all aspects of wildland fire suppression, prevention, and so on. But personally, I think that where I see the greatest advances recently is in prediction, basically when and where fires are likely to occur and how they're going to move, which is really important for protecting populations. And for suppressing fires very effectively. So we've made some huge advances in that respect. So this is something I think will continue further, but also communication. So communication, especially with the public, in terms of being willing to prepare for fire, investing at the community level in fire prevention or reduction of the risk overall, but also evacuation and exposure to smoke. I mean, there's been a lot of deaths, especially in Europe. Europe is leading in terms of wildfire deaths in relation to area burned and in relation to population. This is very sad. We're a highly developed area. This is not really necessary. So I think in terms of communication to individuals, when to evacuate, where to go, what to do, I think there are big advances yet to come. And we're moving into an era now where communication has become so powerful that I think this is one of the big advances that we've made very soon. So I'm quite positive in that respect. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I think in the interest of time, we leave it at that. I hope the dialogue between science and policy doesn't start and end at this conference, and so we look forward to continue working with you and thank all of you very much for your presence today. Thank you very much. Back to you, Joe.
Now, thank you, Catherine. And I had, of course, prepared to be making some very insightful comments to finish, but we've run out of time, so I'm just going to say two things. One is we've heard a lot about the negative feedback loops, the impact of climate change on wildfires and the impact of wildfires on climate change. And it's a really vicious circle. That, to me, really emphasizes the need, the urgent need to mitigate climate change in the first place. Secondly, we're hearing now about suppression plus. So shifting the thinking to risk assessment, prevention and adaptation, the need has been recognized, the shift and the rethink has started, but it needs to speed up. So I'm just going to finish by extending my thanks to all the speakers. Thank you, Minister Abrenosa, for staying with us throughout the session. Thank you to the panelists for your insightful and thoughtful comments at the end. And thank you very much to the OECD team for pulling this session together. I know a huge amount of work has gone into it. And finally, thank you, audience, for sticking with us to the end. Now you are free to go and have lunch. Thank you all very much.